it. So the plan for today is a couple things. One, really talk about data and a framework to think about data, because there's a lot of noise in the industry out there. That's the first thing. We're going to talk about also a case study, which may or may not be a thinly veiled sales pitch, okay, in terms of using the data. So that's the plan for this morning. So in terms of thinking about big data, we've heard this many times. The future's here, right? So big data's here. The ability to actually one-to-one target is here and now. So the ability to find specific users, data signal them, and target is very much here. The challenge really is, how do you sift through all of the data out there and find what's really actionable for your particular audience? So we're going to talk a little bit about doing that. So everyone's heard about the big data problem. There's a lot of data out there. And I think as an industry, we've really done ourselves, the data industry, a disservice by kind of flooding people with all these different data types. So if you think about it in the ecosystem, there are many different data types out there. So we talk about profile data, who data, demographics, past purchase data, census information. We're exposed to behavioral data, intender data, search data. We're exposed to technographics, time of day, day of week. And so I think there's been this flood of just data on the market, and the big challenge is, how do you organize it and make it truly actionable? So today I hope to provide a little bit of framework, maybe how to think about using what your marketing goals are and how you align the right data with those marketing goals. So the key ingredients for success for audience targeting, one is about starting with the right data. So all the fancy algorithms in the world are useless unless you're actually using the right data to begin with. And we'll talk a little bit about choosing the right data types in a second. The other challenge and necessity for audience targeting is scale and efficiency. So it's one thing if you found an amazing data signal that helps you target the right audience, but it needs to be scalable to be effective, and it needs to be efficient in terms of the process. And then finally, portability, right? So it's great to find an audience target, but if it's only available with one publisher on one particular site, it's not particularly helpful. So the ability to have an audience targeting scheme that is actually portable across multiple media types is also really critical. So let's talk about defining the right data. So looking at a traditional marketing funnel, so starting at the bottom of the funnel, conversion campaigns. And those are all about finding people who are in market right now and converting them. So people that are raising their hands loudly and converting those folks. So things like search terms, retargeting, I would consider those more bottom funnel campaigns, where the objective is to take existing demand and convert them today. Moving up the funnel, we talk in the industry about prospecting. So the objective there is, can we stimulate new demand amongst the right audience? And then finally, on the branding side, that's about building brand awareness, brand consideration. And again, from a traditional funnel, they're very supporting strategies. So the brand builds the awareness, the prospecting kind of pushes someone into market, and the conversion campaigns are all about capitalizing on that demand. And the paradigm I want to set up and discuss is, through each stage of the funnel, there's different types of data that are more appropriate. And again, marketing, in my view, is all about signal. Finding what's that signal that you can latch onto to say, this is the message, this is the right person I want to hit. So if you think about more of the bottom funnel campaigns, and again, I think we all have experience in the bottom funnel, that's more behavioral data. So people raising their hand, there's a signal that says, hey, I'm in market. I'm going to a particular website, I'm doing a search term. Again, very much about behavioral. The further up the funnel you move in terms of prospecting and branding, there's less behavioral signals. It's more about finding the right person, not necessarily what they're doing. And this is more the realm of profile data. So things like demographics, financial information. So roughly speaking, I would say that the bottom funnel is more suited for behavioral type of data, and more upper funnel campaigns are going to be more about profile data. So the challenge then is, with that paradigm, is, again, finding the right data signals, but ultimately there's two different types of data signals that are out there. On the one hand, there's raw data, so kind of the raw attributes, the fact that someone came to your website, a particular demographic element, for example. And then there's various techniques out there to kind of expand or refine that data to become an actionable target. So raw data doesn't always equal a good audience, right? There's some refinement process that needs to take place. So under this paradigm, so again, we talked a little bit about behavioral data, things like search terms, life stage events, someone went to your website. I would submit that, again, those are very much behavioral data. And the interesting thing about behavioral data is it tends to be much more lower scale, but it tends to be pretty high value in terms of its ability to have a signal. In other words, someone coming to your website from a retargeting, there's not many events that happen, but that's a pretty good signal. You can use that even directly as an audience. And the challenge for expanding that signal to augment that signal is really a question of, can you expand that signal to boost the scale without actually losing the signal? That's the key. And so there's various techniques on the market that people have used to kind of expand the reach of those signals expand the reach of the scale without losing the signals. So things like act-alike models, people do inferred segments, intender type of marketing. So those are the techniques that are out there to expand those signals. As you move up the funnel and look at more upper funnel campaigns, there's a fair amount of raw data points out there: demographics, lifestyle variables, interests, hobbies, etc. And the challenge with demographics and more profile data is they tend to have really high scale but low signal. Knowing a single demographic attribute about someone is interesting, but it's not particularly helpful to define an audience. Most people's audiences cannot be defined by one or two demographic data points, for example, right? So the challenge here, it's really a question of combination. So you're taking a bunch of raw data points and pulling them together to create this composite or more of a refined target. So it's interesting, and some of the techniques out there, things like lookalike models, you hear about people combining different segments together, and you hear about things like pre-built clusters, and we're going to talk about those three in a second. But I want you to think very differently about behavioral data, which is about, hey, it's got a super strong signal, how do I scale that without losing the signal? And more of the profile data, which is about combining a whole bunch of really weak signals into something that's a really effective audience target. Okay, so that's, again, high level, at least my view, of kind of the different types of data out there and aligning your goals. Okay, so with that said, I want to talk about a case study and kind of walk you through an example of one of our clients. This was for an luxury auto brand launch, and the second here. So this was a luxury auto brand launch, and there was 4 different media types we were asked to target. So RTB media, premium, video, as well as social. And the agency had an existing demographic targeting they were using on the screen there. They were targeting age 35 to 64, income 150,000, males, and then college educated. That was kind of the RFP that went around the world saying, hey, here's who we want to target. Pretty stereotypical looking kind of brand launch for an auto OEM. And they asked us to say, hey, is there a better way to do this? And the answer is yes. I'll show you how we did that in a second. So that's kind of the targeting criteria that we were given. And so we asked the agency kind of, what are you doing today? What are some of the techniques you're using? And one of the techniques they're using is basically combining demographics. So this is the segment combination concept, right? And so what you see is, if you actually go to any of the exchanges out there, the DSPs, and you say, hey, I want to buy 4 segments. I want to buy males, 36 to 64, 150K income, and college, right? Each of those segments independently is pretty large, right? 37 million, 110 million. The challenge comes when you actually combine those together, right? So to get at that target market, you have to get more precision in your targeting, you tend to combine many of these segments together. The challenge is when you do that, you end up with a pretty small scale. So you can very quick, by even 2 or 3 overlays, you end up with a small scale pretty quickly, right? So your challenge is balancing the scale and the efficiency, right? The more efficient your targeting gets, the smaller your scale. If you want huge scale, you have to move away from efficiency, right? So this is the challenge, again, that most of you have probably seen firsthand in terms of using segment kind of overlays to kind of achieve a goal. The other technique that's out there that the agency was using is pre-built clusters. So pre-built clusters are a form of unsupervised learning. And so when a data company builds a cluster, what they do is they take a listing of people in the US, balanced for the entire US population, and they'll pick maybe 4 or 5 factors. They'll pick maybe age, urbanicity, financial profile, a couple things like that, and they'll build a model. And the objective of that model is to put people into buckets, maybe 110 buckets, 64 buckets, some number of buckets. And the objective is to separate people as neatly as you can into these nice buckets. And that's great in terms terms of a theoretical approach, but the data used to power those segments might have nothing to do with your audience, right? They're pre-built ahead of time, so you're kind of stuck with whatever raw data was used to create those segments. And so this is a typical problem that you'll see. So here's a vision of a segment. We'll simplify it. We'll say there's 16 pre-built clusters out there. And then what you do is you kind of overlay your audience. So you give them a file, they take your audience, they run it through their algorithm, and they say, hey, here's how your population distributes across these 16 segments. And you go, okay, here's the segments that over-index, right? These are extra good for your particular population. And they go, wow, you've got 40% audience reach by doing these segments. Okay, the problem is you had to buy 25% of the segments to do that, right? So again, pre-built clusters, they're better than nothing, but they tend to be pretty inefficient. To get like the reach that you want to see, you have to buy a lot of them. So you end up buying 25% of all the people out there to achieve a 40% reach. That's not a good efficiency, right? That's a pretty bad efficiency in the world of things. So, so the TruSignal way, the custom audience approach, we're going to talk a little bit about that methodology in a second. But the idea behind predictive custom models is you actually are able to look at many different data points simultaneously. And it's not a binary thing. You're neither in nor out. What you look for is, first you try to figure out which data signals matter. Like what is really significant that's specific to your audience. And the other thing you look for is how these particular data points relate to each other. So it's a relational type of model. And then what's the relative importance of those things? So you can actually factor in literally hundreds of data points that are known about a particular person to make a decision. And again, it's not male versus female. There's kind of degrees of importance of gender, for example. Okay, so that's the fundamental difference from a predictive type of model. So back to the case study. So for our part of the project to kind of to create a more efficient audience for this brand, what we ended up doing was we actually took a sample of actual owners of competitive vehicles. So we looked at the Audi A6, BMW 5, the Infiniti M, the Cadillac, etc. And we put together just a listing of people, names and addresses, of about 40,000 or so actual owners of the vehicles in the competitive set. And then what we did was a massive data append. So at TruSignal, we have about 40 different sources of offline profile data, ranging from demos to credit type information, financial data, past purchase information, hobbies, interests, a whole slew of data. And then what we did was, running through a predictive algorithm, it's just logistic regression, we figured out which of those data signals were actually significant to predicting someone who would likely be a good fit for this auto manufacturer. At the end of that process, what we ended up with was basically a mathematical formula that was able to factor in literally 100 or so different data points. So it's actually 124 different data points that we factored in. And as you can see on the right side, there's a lot of different factors that help us predict who's likely to be a good fit. Some of the ones you'd expect, for example, income and age and what have you. So the agency was actually pretty right in terms of the average person they were looking for. But there was also a whole series of other things. For example, past purchase of children's goods, their occupation, their hobbies, RV travel, camping, and cooking. So we were able to factor in all of these data points and give them the appropriate weight in the model. Okay? So that was the process we went through. And again, custom built just for that one particular client. And then the next piece of the equation is once we have this mathematical audience formula, the good news about the formula is we're able to apply it to anyone in the US population, essentially. And that formula generates a number from 0 to 9. If we run you through the formula and it gives you a 9, that means you're an amazing fit. You look just like an ideal auto customer. And if it's a 0, you look nothing like it. So it's a scoring model, essentially. Again, for those of you that are kind of steeped in analytics, it's a decile model, basically. We're taking the best 10% of the US population and ranking them as a 9. Okay? So with that mathematical formula, then, we have relationships with various kind of web commerce companies out there, people that are buying things online. We actually see the person's information for a split second when you're making a transaction, run you through the model, and then we place an anonymous targeting cookie on your browser. And we see about 120 million people every single month through this process. And that's a bit of our IP, is kind of seeing these folks and dropping this targeting cookie. After we drop the cookie, we don't know who they are. All we know is this particular browser is a great fit for this particular auto manufacturer. So that's how we were able to take all this amazing offline data and make it very, very actionable for one client on a customized basis. And in fact, in going through this process, about half the data that we use to fuel some of these predictive algorithms is not available for sale anywhere. It's not available online. It's not onboarded anywhere. So you can't go down the street to your local DSP or exchange and buy the data. It's simply not available for sale. So again, that's a piece of our competitive advantage is, like I said, about half the data is not used anywhere else in the ecosystem. So that's kind of the process start to finish. We start with a sample of actual customers. We append a bunch of third-party data. We figure out what really matters. And then we find people that look like that in the ecosystem start to finish. Okay? And then the last step of the equation is once the people are in cookies, it's possible to kind of port this audience to many different media points. Again, we're not in the media business, we're in the audience creation business. So our value proposition for the auto agency was, look, once we build this audience for you, we're going to get it to many different points in the ecosystem where you want to use it. Be that an RTB exchange, be that a pre-roll video. We have a direct connection with Facebook on both the FBX as well as the news feeds, and we can even link the audience with premium publishers. So once you build that audience, it's our job to help you link it and find those people. And again, this solves the portability challenge that people have, right? It's very frustrating, we've heard from marketers, it's very frustrating to buy a particular, like, let's call it soccer moms from this publisher over here, and then you buy soccer moms over here, and they're completely different in terms of how are they defined, and it's a completely different audience. Since you, as a marketer, if you actually control your own audience, you know there's consistency across all the different media types. So the portability and the consistency was really a key factor for this auto manufacturer. Okay, so how do we do, right? At the end of the day, we're an analytics company, so this is the geek out slide. We had to compare, like, okay, how do we do compared to some of the other methodologies? So this is what we did to compare our results. And again, the objective was, can we create a more efficient way to target the right people? So again, based upon this 40,000 sample customers, we compared ourselves against the best demographic targeting that the agency had produced against our modeling technique. Okay? And we looked at it from two different directions. Right? Remember that we talked about this trade-off between scale and efficiency. You can kind of play those two different levers. So we're going to look at the results from two different vantage points, one scale, one efficiency. So the first one is scale. So the top line there, the gender, age, income, education, that's the demographic targeting. And then the second line is TruSignal, right? How we do with TruSignal. And the idea here is, look, for the same scale, in other words, the same number of targetable users, what's the difference in efficiency? So using gender, age, income, and education, the addressable audience was 8.3 million. And that yielded 26% of the actual customers. And how we did that was, we know the age, gender, income, and education of all those 40,000 samples. We literally looked up the demographics, did the math, and said, look, if you use this, you'll get 26% of the people that you want inside of that 40,000. Okay? Comparatively, if you use the TruSignal, the predictive model, you target 8 million people, and you actually get 43% of your audience. Right? So that's where the efficiency equation comes in. Hold scale constant, and you actually get really good efficiency. So the next logical, and that represents an improvement of the audience by a reach by 65% improvement, right? So you're getting much more efficient. Same dollar spend, you're reaching a lot more of the right people. The other question we looked at is, well, what if you actually held your reach constant? What would you have to do demographically to have the same reach as TruSignal? And so what we did was we looked at, again, a 40% reach, and in order to get more reach with demographics, you have to actually relax your criteria, or you can't. You have to. In this case, it turns out if you take income out of the equation, you just look at gender, age, and education, you can actually achieve the same reach. But the problem is you have to target 3.5 times as many people to get the same reach. So your scale goes way up, and in this case, I would say scale is not a good thing. You're buying literally almost 3.5 times as many cookies as you need to reach the same right audience. Again, this is where scale hurts you. So again, back to the efficiency equation, our objective is, can you find the right people in as few impressions as possible? So this resulted in literally only being able to use 27% of the audience of the demographic abilities, right? So again, scale and reach trade-offs. So from a key takeaway perspective, big data can be used effectively to power techniques like predictive modeling. And if you're still using pre-built clusters, demographics, come talk to us afterwards. We have a solution that will, I think, dramatically improve a lot of the efficiencies that we're seeing out there. Again, as you're thinking about your campaign objectives, it's really critical to align the right data with the right kind of campaign objectives. Upper funnel, you're generally going to look at more profile data, where it's about the who. And lower funnel campaigns, you're generally going to look at behavioral data, which is all about what people are doing. And then finally, again, think about the key aspects of a custom approach for audience targeting: scalable, portable, efficiency. Those are kind of the attributes that you want to look for in terms of an outcome. So we're TruSignal, and Glenn here. Raise your hand, Glenn. There's Glenn. Glenn's going to be here the rest of the day. I unfortunately have to scoot shortly after this, but I'll be here for a good half an hour or so if you want to come trade notes after the session. In front of you there is some literature about TruSignal, that story I told about the predictive modeling, blah, blah, blah. It's all there, right? So please grab the handout. And thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time.